My beloved child, the silence around this message has just cracked open, and what slipped through was never supposed to reach the person who loves you. For a long time, something from the past remained buried beneath ordinary conversations, changed subjects, and carefully controlled explanations. An old message. Not forgotten. Hidden. And the strange part is not that it survived. The strange part is that someone, the third party, seemed determined to make certain your soulmate would never see it again. But something changed. A forgotten conversation resurfaced. A detail that once looked meaningless suddenly connected to another detail. And somehow, the words that were supposed to remain behind a closed door found their way into your soulmate's awareness. Stay with this moment, because what happened next is where the story quietly turns. Your soulmate did not react the way the third party expected. There was no dramatic outburst. There was silence. The kind of silence that appears when someone realizes the story they were given may have been incomplete. Your soulmate read the message once. Then again. And on the second reading, one sentence felt different. Not because the words had changed, but because your soulmate had. Time had given them a new perspective. Things they once dismissed suddenly carried weight. Moments involving you that once seemed confusing began rearranging themselves like pieces of a picture finally finding their proper places. And somewhere inside that realization came a question. Why was this message kept away from me? That question is more important than it appears. Because the old message itself is not the real secret. It is the doorway. There is something behind it. Something the third party may have believed would never be examined closely enough to uncover. Listen carefully. The message does not paint you as someone who needed to be feared, avoided, or misunderstood. Quite the opposite. It reveals that long ago, someone already noticed something about you that your soulmate is only beginning to understand now. Your restraint. Your ability to remain quiet when speaking would have been easier. Your unusual way of stepping back rather than forcing yourself into someone's life. And most importantly, the reason behind one decision you made that others completely misinterpreted. What if the moment they called distance was actually protection? What if something they described as indifference was you choosing not to interfere? Your soulmate is beginning to wonder exactly that. And the third party knows it. That is why the resurfacing of this old message matters so much. Because once someone starts questioning one part of a carefully maintained story, they naturally begin questioning the rest. A name appears. A date suddenly matters. A conversation remembered differently becomes impossible to ignore. And now your soulmate is standing at the edge of something they were never expected to investigate. But there is one detail they still have not seen. One missing piece. The part that explains why the third party cared so deeply about keeping this message buried in the first place. You may think this is about jealousy. It is not that simple. You may think someone merely wanted to control the narrative. Closer, but still incomplete. Because hidden beneath all of this is an admission that changes the meaning of the message entirely. And when your soulmate discovers who originally made that admission, they may finally understand why certain things between you always felt unfinished. Stay a little longer with this story. The old message has resurfaced. Your soulmate has seen it. The third party can no longer erase that moment. But the sentence that reveals the real secret? Your soulmate hasn't reached it yet. And when they do, the past may stop looking like the past at all. Something shifted the moment your soulmate looked at that message for the third time. Not because another word appeared. Because one detail finally refused to stay invisible. There was a small reference inside the old conversation, something almost anyone could have skipped over. A time. A place. A sentence that seemed ordinary when it was first written. But your soulmate remembered that moment. And suddenly, the version of the story they had carried for so long no longer fit. The third party had always made it sound as though you disappeared without caring. As though your silence meant you had already chosen another direction. As though you simply stopped trying. Yet the old message suggested something completely different. You had known more than anyone realized. You had noticed tension building around the situation, and instead of making it louder, you stepped away. Not because your feelings had vanished. Because you believed your presence might make everything harder. Pause here. Can you see why this changes everything? Your soulmate is beginning to understand that what looked like rejection may actually have been restraint. And once that possibility entered their mind, another memory returned. A conversation with the third party. At the time, it seemed harmless. The third party had said something like, "You shouldn't read too much into what happened. Just move forward." Simple words. Reasonable words. But now they sound different. Because your soulmate is wondering why someone worked so hard to close a chapter they were never truly part of. And that question is pulling them toward the hidden layer. There is something almost futuristic about moments like this, as if the mind suddenly updates an old version of reality and everything begins reorganizing itself around new information. One truth changes 10 memories. One memory changes an entire story. And your soulmate is experiencing that now. If this message is touching something familiar inside you, share it with someone who may need to hear it, leave a comment with the word "clarity," and subscribe if you want to stay connected to stories that uncover what silence sometimes hides. Because the next discovery is even more important. Your soulmate noticed that the old message was not originally meant for them. It had been sent to someone else. Someone close enough to know what was really happening. And inside that message was a line your soulmate cannot stop thinking about. They are stepping back because they do not want anyone forced to choose. That sentence landed differently. Suddenly, your soulmate saw your past silence from another angle. You were not trying to disappear. You were trying to protect everyone from a decision you believed should happen freely. And now the third party's behavior makes even less sense. Why hide something that makes your intentions look more thoughtful? Why prevent your soulmate from seeing a message that could have cleared up years of misunderstanding? That is where the real secret begins. Because the third party was not only protecting an old story. They were protecting their own role inside it. Stay close to this turning point. Your soulmate has started comparing dates. Old conversations. Things they were told. Things they personally remember. And one contradiction has appeared that cannot easily be explained away. The third party claimed they learned about your decision after everything was already over. But this old message proves they knew much earlier. Much earlier. Which means they had information your soulmate never received. And the question now is no longer, why did you leave? It has become something far more revealing. What did the third party know, and why did they keep it from me? The answer is getting closer. But there is still one name missing from the message. And once your soulmate realizes whose name was removed, the entire hidden secret may finally come into view. The missing name was not erased by accident. That is the detail your soulmate is beginning to understand now. At first, it looked like an incomplete screenshot. A cropped section. A harmless gap in an old conversation that had survived longer than anyone expected. But the more your soulmate studied it, the less harmless that gap became. Because the sentence surrounding the missing name still made sense. Too much sense. Someone had been speaking about you. Someone had been defending your intentions. And someone else had apparently decided that one identity should never be connected to those words again. Your soulmate felt it immediately. There was a person behind this message who knew the truth long before the confusion began. And the third party knew exactly who that person was. Stay with this carefully, because this is where the entire story changes direction. Your soulmate started remembering a gathering from the past. Nothing dramatic happened that day. At least, that was how it seemed. People talked. Someone laughed too loudly. A few private conversations happened away from the main group. And you were unusually quiet. Back then, your soulmate assumed you were distant. Now they remember something else. You kept looking toward one particular person. Not nervously. Almost as though you were waiting for them to say something. They never did. That person may be the missing name. And suddenly, another strange memory has returned. A few days after that gathering, the third party told your soulmate that you had already made your choice. But what choice? Nobody explained it. Your soulmate simply accepted the statement because there seemed to be no reason to question it. Until now. Because inside the resurfaced message, there is a phrase suggesting that no final decision had been made at all. Think about that. If the old message is accurate, then your soulmate may have been encouraged to believe something had ended while you were still trying to understand what was happening. That does not automatically mean anyone had some grand plan. Sometimes people interfere because they think they know what is best. Sometimes they become too invested in an outcome. Sometimes they protect a version of events because admitting the full truth would force them to admit they influenced something that was never theirs to control. And this possibility is now sitting heavily inside your soulmate's mind. But there is more. The hidden name is connected to a second message. One your soulmate did not know existed. They discovered a reference to it buried further down the conversation. Just 4 words. Tell them what happened. Nothing more. No explanation. No visible response. Yet those 4 words have opened another door. Who was supposed to tell your soulmate? What happened that required an explanation? And why does it appear that explanation never arrived? Your soulmate is no longer reading the old message emotionally. They are studying it. Carefully. Patiently. And that is exactly what the third party never expected. Because when emotion settles, patterns become easier to see. Dates line up. Contradictions stand out. Silence becomes information. Your soulmate has now noticed that one major misunderstanding between you began almost immediately after that second message was mentioned. That timing feels impossible to ignore. And something inside them is saying, keep looking. Not with anger. With clarity. Because this is no longer about blaming the past. It is about understanding it. You might miss the turning point if you leave this story here. Your soulmate is about to uncover why the missing name mattered so much. And the truth may be more unexpected than anything they imagined. The person whose identity was hidden was not an enemy. They were not competing with you. They were someone the third party trusted. Someone who had been there when one important conversation happened. A witness to the exact moment everything changed. And according to the message, that person tried to correct the misunderstanding. Once. Then twice. But something stopped them. Your soulmate has just found the first clue explaining what. A short reply. Only one sentence. And the third party wrote it. Please leave this alone for now. For now. Those two words are echoing louder than anything else. Because, for now, suggests the truth was never meant to disappear forever. Only long enough for something else to happen first. And your soulmate has finally begun asking the question that may expose the real secret. What exactly were they waiting for? The answer was hiding inside a detail no one thought would matter anymore. Your soulmate found it when they stopped looking at what the message said and started looking at what happened immediately after it. There had been a delay. Several days when nobody contacted you directly. Several days when the third party kept telling everyone that space was, probably for the best. But now your soulmate understands something those words concealed. That silence was not empty. Behind it, a decision was being made. And you were not part of that decision. That realization landed quietly, but deeply. Because according to another fragment from the Resurface conversation, the person whose name had been hidden wanted to speak to your soulmate immediately. They believed a misunderstanding had gone too far. They wanted to explain what you had actually said. Yet the third party asked them to wait. Why? Your soulmate finally found the reason. The third party believed that if the truth came out too quickly, your soulmate would return to you. Read that again in your mind. Not because you had done something terrible. Not because there was some frightening revelation waiting underneath the surface. But because the third party knew your soulmate still cared. And they believed distance would eventually weaken that connection. That is what they were waiting for. Time. They expected enough time to turn uncertainty into acceptance. Enough time for unanswered questions to become assumptions. Enough time for your soulmate to stop wondering what you truly meant. But something they never calculated has happened. The old message survived. And now your soulmate has seen enough to realize that the emotional distance between you may have grown around information that was incomplete from the beginning. What if one missing conversation redirected an entire relationship? What if the future changed because two people were responding to different versions of the same moment? That possibility is now impossible for your soulmate to dismiss. There is no rage in their realization. There is something stronger. Awareness. They are beginning to understand why certain memories never felt fully resolved. Why your silence stayed in their thoughts longer than it should have. Why moving forward never completely erased the feeling that something had been left unfinished. And somewhere beneath all of that, they have started wondering about you again. Not the version described by other people. You. Your actual intentions. Your actual words. Your side of the story. If this unfolding message has kept you here, you may want to share it with someone who understands how easily silence can be misunderstood. You can leave your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe if you want to remain connected as this story moves toward its deepest revelation. Because your soulmate just discovered something else. The witness did eventually send another message. Much later. Long after everyone believed the situation had settled. And this time, they did not send it to the third party. They wrote it somewhere else. Somewhere they believed it might eventually be found. Your soulmate has located part of it. Only part. But the opening words changed everything. I should have told you sooner. Then comes a gap. A missing section. And after that, one final line. They never knew what you gave up for them. Your soulmate froze at that sentence. Because suddenly this story is not simply about what was hidden from them. It is about something you sacrificed without ever asking for recognition. Something connected to the reason you stepped away. The third party knew about it. The witness knew about it. But your soulmate apparently never did. And now, after all this time, they are closer than ever to discovering what you quietly gave up. The old message has already changed the past. But the missing section may change how your soulmate sees your entire future together. Then your soulmate noticed the timestamp. And suddenly, the sacrifice mentioned in that hidden line was no longer an abstract mystery. It happened on the exact day they believed you had stopped caring. That single detail rearranged everything. For years, your soulmate had remembered that day as the moment you emotionally disappeared. The replies became shorter. Your energy changed. You stopped explaining yourself. And from the outside, it looked simple. You had chosen distance. But the resurfaced message tells a completely different story. On that same day, you were preparing to step away from something you deeply wanted, not because your feelings had weakened, but because you had become convinced that staying would create pressure your soulmate was not ready to carry. You gave up the chance to defend yourself. You gave up the opportunity to correct every rumor. Most surprising of all, you gave up one final conversation that could have changed everything. Your soulmate never knew that conversation had almost happened. The witness did. The third party did too. And now a sentence from the hidden section is beginning to make sense. They said they would rather be misunderstood than become the reason someone feels trapped. Your soulmate read those words twice. Then stopped. Because that sounds nothing like the person they had been told you were. It does not sound careless. It does not sound cold. It sounds like someone making an imperfect but deeply thoughtful choice. Stay with this next detail. The third party apparently knew you were preparing to speak honestly with your soulmate. There had even been a plan. A simple meeting. No pressure. No dramatic declaration. Just two people finally having the conversation everyone else had been interpreting for them. But that meeting never happened. And the old message contains the first indication of why. Someone told you your soulmate had already made a final decision. At almost the same time, someone told your soulmate that you no longer wanted the conversation. Two messages. Two different people hearing two different endings. And between those endings stood the third party. Now your soulmate is not jumping to conclusions. They are doing something far more powerful. They are comparing what they were told with what actually existed. That difference matters. Because truth does not need imagination when evidence starts connecting itself. One timestamp. One hidden name. One postponed explanation. And now two conflicting messages. The pattern is becoming difficult to ignore. But there is still a deeper question. Why would the third party care so much about preventing that final conversation? Your soulmate initially assumed the answer must involve personal feelings. Yet the witness's hidden message suggests another possibility. The third party was afraid of what you might reveal during that meeting. Not about your relationship. About them. That changes the entire direction of this story. Because suddenly, keeping you and your soulmate apart may not have been the main objective. It may have been a consequence. The real objective was keeping one truth from being spoken. And you knew that truth. Perhaps not all of it. But enough. Your soulmate has now found a strange reference near the end of the recovered conversation. It mentions a promise. A promise the third party apparently made long before any misunderstanding between you began. There is no explanation of what the promise involved. Only one unsettlingly simple line. If they ever compare what they know, everything comes out. Everything. Your soulmate cannot stop thinking about that word. Because everything means this old message was never just about protecting one secret. There may have been several connected truths hidden behind it. And somehow, you were standing close enough to discover them. The future feels different when the past finally becomes readable. Your soulmate can sense it now. They are not simply uncovering why you stepped away. They are uncovering why someone needed both of you to remain confused. And the next piece they find will reveal what that old promise was really protecting. A completely different possibility entered your soulmate's mind when they found what the promise was connected to. It was not a promise of love. It was not a promise about keeping two people apart. It was a promise about silence. Years earlier, long before the misunderstanding between you and your soulmate became impossible to ignore, the third party had agreed to protect someone from the consequences of a decision they had made. At the time, it may even have seemed harmless. A private favor. A quiet agreement. Something everyone involved believed would eventually fade into the past. But it did not fade. Because later, you learned a small part of what had happened. Not through gossip. Not through suspicion. You noticed something that did not match. A story changed depending on who told it. One person remembered a conversation happening before a certain date. Another insisted it happened afterward. And you were the one who quietly recognized the contradiction. That is why the line from the recovered message matters so much. If they ever compare what they know, everything comes out. They did not only mean you and your soulmate. It meant three people. You, your soulmate, and the witness whose name had been removed. Each of you apparently held a different piece of the same truth. Separate, those pieces looked meaningless. Together, they formed the complete picture. Your soulmate is beginning to see that now. And here is where the mystery takes another unexpected turn. The third party may never have intended for the situation to become as complicated as it did. One hidden detail required another explanation. That explanation created another contradiction. Then another. Eventually, telling the truth would have meant admitting that several earlier conversations had been shaped around protecting the original promise. So instead of opening the door, they kept adding locks. But locks do not erase what is behind them. They only delay discovery. Your soulmate has finally discovered what the witness was asked to keep quiet about. There had been a conversation involving you. A conversation the third party later described very differently. According to the witness, you had not been criticizing your soulmate. You had been defending them. That changes something enormous. Because one of the reasons your soulmate believed you had pulled away was that they were told you had privately expressed doubt about them. Now the witness's message suggests the opposite. You had said you did not want your soulmate blamed for what was happening. You even asked others to leave them out of it. And somehow, that became a story about you having doubts. Your soulmate stared at that contradiction for a long time. Imagine carrying one sentence for years. Then discovering the original meaning was almost the reverse. This is why the old message had to stay buried. Not because it contained one dramatic revelation. Because it contained context. And context has a strange power. It can transform the meaning of everything that came after. Your soulmate is now looking back at your behavior with new eyes. The moments when you did not argue. The times you could have exposed someone but stayed quiet. The way you accepted being misunderstood instead of forcing people to believe you. Perhaps your silence was never emptiness. Perhaps it was carrying more than anyone knew. But one question still refuses to disappear. Why did you protect the third party too? Because according to the witness, there was a moment when you could have revealed the entire truth. You had enough information. You had the opportunity. And you deliberately chose not to use it. That decision confused the witness then. Now it is confusing your soulmate. Why would someone who had been misunderstood protect the very person connected to the misunderstanding? The answer appears in the final surviving fragment. Just 7 words. They believed the truth would hurt someone innocent. Your soulmate does not yet know who that innocent person was. But the third party does. And when that identity comes into view, the hidden secret will stop being about the past alone. It will explain why the third party is still afraid of this message resurfacing now.